You've got to improve it in your business. Who'd you go to?
Got to be DB Results, AA.
I tell you, DB Results are the right digital solutions for your business.
When the going gets tough,
going gets tough.
When the going gets tough,
DB Results.
When the going gets tough,
DB Results.
Well, there you go.
I'm Ilana Razbash, and this is Radio Architecture. Good evening from beautiful Bunurong country. We are broadcasting to you live on Radio Karam from deep in the Karam swamp. This was unceded Aboriginal land. And it's actually... Tonight I'm really noticing how cold and how windy it is and how close we are here in the Karam on the long beach, to the coast, to the ocean, really feeling all the forces of country. As always, if you'd like to join the conversation this evening, text us on 0493 213 831. We'd love to hear from you and have you join Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. My guest and conversation partner this evening is Sandra Githinji. She's a Kenyan-Australian interdisciplinary designer, curator and educator based in Naarm, Melbourne, Australia. Her design practice, Sandra Githinji Studio, spans the intersection of cultural histories, pedagogy, activism and the built form with a focus on cultural expression that centers an African perspective, both on the continent and diasporic. The studio works across scales and typologies, including hospitality, residential, retail, set, exhibition, furniture, lighting, object design, and brand collaborations. She is the recipient of the Australian Design Review's 30 Under 30 recognition and is currently undertaking her PhD at RMIT University. Welcome to the program, Sandra.
Thank you so much for having me, Ilana.
So glad to have you on. And those who are joining us on YouTube, hello. Welcome to the live stream. They can see that you and I are both holding a cup of tea.
Oh, yes.
And we're keeping warm. And this is actually my first time doing a radio broadcast with a beverage in hand intentionally. And that's quite important to you in your practice.
Yes. Like, tea is a big thing culturally, I would say. If you're Kenyan, you grew up drinking tea, and it's always a way of welcoming someone. So on my way here, I was thinking, I hope there's tea. And when I got in, I saw English breakfast. I'm like, perfect. Yeah.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome to Radio Karam. Welcome to the program. And I think you have a feeling about what the first question is. Most of my guests do, most that have listened to the program. And that's, what's your earliest memory of a building or place?
Actually, that's interesting because on the way here on the train, I was looking at the water and it kind of reminded me of home. So like, I'm from Kenya. Nairobi is where I grew up. That's kind of a city in a city. But then I spent 3 years in Mombasa, which is the Kenyan coast. And I was in primary school, so from grade 1 to 3. But those are like my fondest memories of being in the coast and just being able to, like, school used to end at noon because it was really hot. So, after that we'd go to the beach constantly. So that idea of being close to water and being on the beach is something that is very grounding for me. But I guess that's not really a architectural building of sorts.
It is out here on the Long Beach.
Yeah.
It's our main public space.
Yeah.
Through Karam, really between Mordialloc and Seaford.
Yeah.
What used to be that Karam swamp that I talked about in my acknowledgement of country in the opening was all swampland, and we're left with the dune system and that beach, and that's the main public space.
Yeah. So there you go. Like it's a place in itself, doesn't necessarily need to have that kind of human-centric building to ground it. And I think that's something I always think about, like in terms of thinking around built environment and the things that are already there in nature, and trying to find ways back to some of those spaces and giving them reverence as well. And it's hard to kind of figure out what that is when you're working in a built environment that is constantly advocating to build and to make. Yeah.
I love that expansive definition, though. And that's something for me that comes through really clearly in your practice, especially in that bio opening. You do a bit of everything.
I do. I wear very many hats. Jack of all trades, is it? Yeah, but like master of none is what I feel like I am. Because I kind of like to dabble, you know, like in terms of my profession. I graduated from RMIT interior design. But then also interior design, coming into interior design was also a bit of an interesting one, if you don't mind me sharing.
Please
like,
tell me
coming
about
into
that.
Yeah, so interior design was a bit of a decoy for me because I always wanted to be an artist. And then my mom was very adamant that I needed to do something that would give me job security, as they say.
Classic, yeah.
And RMIT seemed to have the perfect kind of structure around something that was touching the arts, but then, you know, positioned within built environment. And I thought, oh, this is going to be great. So that's how I got into interior design. And then it kind of just opened out to so many other things. And I've always been interested in trying out, giving things a go and figuring out where I sit. And I'm still exploring at the moment. So I haven't really found a niche. And I don't even know if I should be looking for one, per se. So, yeah.
You're a recipient of the 30 under 30, so your practice is very much emergent in the most positive way of using that word, because I hate the word emerging. You know, at what point does the butterfly leave the cocoon? At what point has the butterfly emerged? So I find that it can be used as a pejorative sometimes, but so much opportunity, so much growth, so much beginning.
Yeah, yeah. I like that phrase of like, you know, when do you actually mark that start? Because like you would say the practice started in 2019, but really I've always kind of been working on my own things even whilst I was in practice. Like when I say practice, I mean employment, working at an architecture studio. And that's something that I always try and advocate with my students, that the creative practice is something that doesn't leave you. And you have to try and hold it. You have to be the one who drives that and not relinquish that power to, say, your job. Because then there's a lot of people who say, oh, I'm feeling so unfulfilled in my job, assuming that it should be doing everything for you creatively. And I think it's important for you to hold this creativity and kind of have it as something that's sacred to you and that you continue to do, even though the project you're working on in the office might not be able to tick those boxes. What are you working on the side? Like, what's driving you? What are you interested in?
What's feeding your soul and your heart personally?
That's it. Yeah.
That's such important advice for listeners.
Yeah. Like it was a hard pill to swallow for me because like it came from unfulfillment and then realizing, wait a minute, like I am in control of this thing. And then I left practice for varied reasons. One being burning out. This whole like human capital kind of machine kind of just drove me down. But I think if I had recognized this, I probably wouldn't have left, you know, like commercial practice, because I'd have understood that I can still, you know, hold on to that without having to judge an entire industry, because I left it and said, oh, architecture can't do this for me. Where in reality, I think there's space for that to happen if you're just very proactive in finding the pockets that will allow you to do that.
What was that first glimmer of curiosity for you that took you out of the conventional commercial path?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's a bit of a long-winded answer. I think for me, it was, well, it's worth stating, when I was working in practice, I was still teaching. So I've always been interested in being in the classroom. I think I learn a lot from my students. And it's what I love about the classroom is its conversation. It can hold that space, whereas, you know, you're dealing with budgets and you're dealing with timelines. There's often not much room to talk about, you know, what is the meaning of this and the value. So I was always doing that. But one project in particular, which was based in South Africa, actually, in fact, was the one that really got me questioning a lot of the things that I was doing, because for a long time I was fine with, you know, your Le Corbusier's and your Mies as your kind of references for design. And I never even questioned if there was any African I knew of no African architect. And it didn't even occur to me that that was something that was problematic. So it was when I was doing this project and I was doing research and I was like, where who is an African architect? I know of none. Does that even exist? And then that opened up this whole kind of worms and kind of deep dive into so much that I didn't have access to. And then I guess there's one very Eurocentric kind of Western leaning education that I received, but then also two, there wasn't that inquiry, because there's so much learning you can do for yourself,
Yeah.
but you need that interest. So I think that was a catalyst for me. And then I just uncovered all these incredible people doing incredible things in that context, but then doing things differently as well.
Who have become your heroes?
Yeah, they've definitely become like key like mentors for me. And I was really blessed to be able to meet one of them last year. So I had the chance to go to Venice for the Venice Biennale College, and I got to work with and meet Leslie Loco, which was incredible because she's one of like, she's critical in my work. And for those who don't know Leslie Loco, she's a Scottish Ghanaian architect and writer, and she was the curator for the Venice Biennale last year. And she had a big focus on decolonization and decarbonization as the themes for that year. So just like being able to then be expanded to this different individuals, there's a whole community of practice who want to expand how we define architecture and spatial practice. And it's just been really generative for me in my work.
What was your first kind of venture into practice, or what was the first medium before interiors, perhaps, or did it emerge in parallel to studying interior design?
I always used to, so before I did interior design, I used to paint. So I used to, it was 2-dimensional acrylic on canvas. That's what I always wanted to do. I was really interested in that. And I remember finding an extract from a newspaper article in 2006. And it was for an arts competition. And I had written that in the future, I'd love to be an architect or an interior designer. And I talked about why I loved painting like people, because the figurative was about kind of this idea of having a mirror to understand people in a much more deeper way, that you could do that with portraiture. And I was so surprised because I was in grade 6, I think. I'm like, wow, I was deep back then because it's interesting to see that kind of come around now and thinking about how I'm thinking about the human-centric aspects of how we design and being able to move beyond just, theory and think about impact. And I think some of those sentiments that came from a painterly way of viewing the world are still applicable now, even though I practice in a more spatial, like, I guess, 3-dimensional spatial way.
That clarity and innocence that comes from childhood before you have a projection or understanding of what is design, what is architecture, what is interior design, before you have any of these concepts in you. I love that because instantly you started telling me about the figure of, or the representation of the portrait of the human head, the image, and I thought of your project Bloom.
Oh, yes.
So it does, in a way, come full circle, doesn't it?
It does, yeah, when I think about it in that way. But also Bloom was also a bit of a difficult one getting into Bloom. It wasn't so easy to do that work because I'd come from a kind of art history, architectural history that was very leaning towards abstraction. And even when I was thinking about doing that particular figurative sculpture, there were points when I just thought I should just abstract it. I should just deconstruct it. I should, because that's going to be
there's a programming, right?
Yeah, like that's going to be more appealing to the design community.
Palatable. Do you feel you have to mute yourself?
Not necessarily mute myself. I think it was a very deliberate decision to say, no, I was going to do it in a figurative way. But I was very cognizant of like the aesthetic that I was, and the kind of power dynamic of like aesthetics that I was having to contend with in making that decision. Because, well, for one, the reason why I kept it figurative was I really wanted to bring out a lot more imagery with an Afrocentric perspective, because when you think about the kind of faces that you revere and that you're aware of and you remember, it's all these like sculptures that are very Eurocentric or even like male derivative. And if you think about Africa, it's always like, oh, Nefertiti or something, like they kind of remember that one thing. And I was like, well, we need more of those images so that it's not so unique. You know that face. Yeah, you've seen it. And I think there's power in being able to see a face versus representation or an abstraction of something, because those stories are not there. There's not enough of those stories for then to then lean into. Okay, now we can abstract that. We've seen that a million of times. It's like you've seen enough of Greek gods. Now you can abstract Zeus. But you know what I mean? But look, when you say the name, you know it, and you conjure an image. So it was about being able to hold that image. And thinking about like cultural inheritance as well. Like, I'm interested in history. Let's archive these stories in ways that are material and that can be something the next generations can then hold on to and then build on. And maybe then abstract, because, they're really tired of seeing Queen Nandi. Like, I'd love that. I'd love that we get to a point where these figures are just known and they've now become boring. And now we want to do something more interesting with them.
Can you describe Bloom for listeners?
Yes, actually, that was a good. Should have started there. So Bloom is a project that I worked on in 2020 during the lockdown. I was still working a 9-to-5 job. And as most of you would know, during that period, there was a lot of, social activism that was coming to the surface. Black Lives Matter was a huge movement. And I was really tired of that kind of inundated being on social media and just seeing all these images of Black bodies in, quite precarious situations, and just thinking, how can we kind of own that narrative and be able to self-represent versus seeing, representations of ourselves, and just kind of getting your power back in a way and being able to say that there is so many other stories of us that are not just one-dimensional. And so the project was thinking about how do we archive stories of African women, historical women, Queen Nandi being the first that I chose to work on. Most of you might have heard of Shaka Zulu, who's a very prolific king in South Africa of Zulu Nation. Queen Nandi is his mom. She doesn't get the spotlight as much as he does. And I thought it would be great to kind of weave storytelling and my practice of interior design and something that can live in our homes. And I didn't have enough capital to make it happen. So, I bought a 3D printer, found a way of assembling it. I had a lot of time. So kind of figuring out how to do that, prototyping, and then figured I don't have enough money. So how am I going to make this happen? And then crowdfunding became a great way of doing it. So launched on Kickstarter and then managed to raise enough capital to get it made, which was crazy. But it was such a great learning because that built a lot of community around the project. People were writing in and saying, it's so lovely to see my queen. People who have that heritage, others who don't, who are, African diasporic, but then, far removed, but then still feeling a sense of like connection to the work. People writing in and saying, could you do my queen from this place? So it was just like really, really lovely to hear all those sentiments and then have this project that ran 2 years and the anticipation of it coming to life, but then it being created by everyone coming together and wanting to make it happen. Like it wasn't a solo activity at all, like it sits under my practice, but it's been a community project.
Amazing power of the internet.
Yeah. Yeah.
And such a beautiful object in the end as well.
Oh, thanks a lot.
She's gorgeous too.
Yeah. I should have brought her.
We'll put up a picture on our Instagram for the follow-up post for the listeners, as we always do. So, and you always intended that the vessel should then bloom to be a vase to be a vessel.
Yeah, I was like kind of like anchoring it to something that was about care and a ritual. And I think the idea of having fresh blooms in your home, and it has that consistency. So it's not just an object that you don't come back to. It's something that you're constantly interacting with and caring for. And I thought that would be quite a beautiful kind of gesture. So like I've started thinking about the rituals that we have in our homes and how they help nurture us, and how, like such a piece can also become conversational. Like it's how you pass a story on. You see something, you're interested in it, you ask a question, a conversation unfolds, and then there's a story there. So I think it's having something that can be quite centrally located in your home that allows for that to happen, which was the thinking around it. But that's also kind of evolved, I would say, because there's a functionality that it's a vase, and then there's the sculptural element that it's, this figurative piece. But then working on other pieces now, I've had interactions with people who have acquired them and have them in their homes, and learning that there's also something quite powerful about a piece that might sit in the periphery and might not necessarily have a function in a utilitarian sense, but it is still having an outcome in your home.
Can sit pride of place. It can be there with your life.
Exactly, yeah. And that was interesting for me to come to, having, studied interior design and really thinking around functionality and use in that sense, in a utilitarian sense, to say that there's something still powerful about an object that might not necessarily serve a day-to-day practical use, but it's offering something up for you in its presence.
I love that creative culture is coming back to the moment that we can talk about things being beautiful and it's
my
okay.
Gosh. Yes. That word, you couldn't use that word in uni.
Once upon a time you couldn't. No, it could not be beautiful.
No, absolutely not.
So we're reclaiming that.
I love it. Let's reclaim it. Honestly, if you think about why did we have to make cave paintings? If you think about architecturally, let's go back. The first architectural home would be a cave, and it's sheltering you. But then there was still need for us to do that, and I think there's something that's more spiritually linked to creative acts than we give
for beauty,
value.
for ornament,
for beauty. Yeah,
storytelling.
yes.
It's a human condition. There's this idea that I love, I keep coming back to, that being creative is actually a human behavior.
Yes.
It's not a skill, it's not talent.
Oh, yes.
It's not a trait. It is a trait and a human behavior.
Yeah, it's something that you can nurture, but I truly believe that creativity is something that everyone holds. We do it in so many different ways. And it's not kind of this thing that's only to a certain few. No, I love that. I totally agree.
Did you do some of the other specially requested queens? Are they coming up?
Oh, good question. Yeah, we're working on one at the moment.
Can you tell us who she is? Sneak peek for
no, I can tell you what region. So
okay, we'll take that.
West Africa.
Amazing.
Yeah, that's all I can divulge at this point in time.
And in terms of materiality or acting as a vessel, can we expect some more beautiful flowers?
Definitely vessel. Yeah, I think we're keeping the narrative within the collection. It will definitely be a vessel, but of just kind of a different form and a different, yeah.
What? And a bloom, what was the final material? Was it ceramic or porcelain?
We did it in an eco-resin. And that was mainly because of Queen Nandi's headdress. The amount of detail that's in that piece just couldn't be captured with ceramics.
Yes.
In the scale that we were working, we'd have to go really big. And I've had a lot of requests to go really big. So
wow.
I don't know. We'll have to kind of see how feasible that is.
I'm seeing a gigantic one in a lobby one day.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to just, but then there's the realities of money and feasibility.
Well, if anyone's listening.
But hey, cha-ching. No, but I think there's just something powerful about scale and I think it's that idea of presence and how that sits within a space. But yeah, definitely ticking along and working on a few of those things.
What was your third medium or the first one out of after interior design that you gravitated towards or decided to experiment with?
Outside of interior design.
What's the first thing you dipped your toe in the water with?
So, whilst I was working in practice, bloom was definitely the first not the first, but the one that branched out from spatial into object, and then that has then moved into furniture pieces. So, did a collaboration with CB2, their retailer in North America. And they had a collection last year called the Black and Design Collective, which is gathering designers globally who are, I guess, Afro-diasporic. And I got to design into that, which was really great. That was my first time doing furniture and lighting. And then this year I had the chance to work in theater. So did my first collaborative set design, did my first feature film as well. And then I think one that's been really an anchor for me to test and to collaborate has been exhibition. So curatorial practice was probably the first thing I dived into once I resigned from my work, which is actually very interesting because I started working on my first exhibition with my good friend Collie, shout out to you. He's in New York at the moment. But he reached out to me in 2021 and said, hey, I want to link you up. There's this cool project we can do together. What do you think? And at the time I was a bit hesitant because I'd never done it before, but I was like, well, let's try it out. And it was funny because we had these constant meetings with Collie, and I never really told him that I had resigned from my work, and like this was the thing that was feeding me and holding me together, until he told me that he wanted to resign from his work, and I was like, do it. It's like, you should do it. So I think this, like, that one exhibition that we did, it was called Say It Loud, and it was from Melbourne Design Week 2022. That was so pivotal for both of us because we had just left like commercial practice, and we were in the space that was allowing us to connect with so many different people, and then to test ideas with that kind of short period time frame, and then I think also to understand what impact was quite quickly, because we both used to work on like large scale projects. They take years to build. You often never get to speak to the end user, and this was just like really compressed. It was like taking a shot, but it was just really, really instrumental for us, especially community building and, talking to people in the industry and getting to know what people are doing outside of like commercial stuff. Yeah.
It's amazing the power of that small finite moment that you can just get a show out or put a project proposal through, and it sits in a small little bit of time and space, but it lives on.
Yes, and actually how does, and archiving that and how that is held. But it was just really, really pivotal, I would say, for us. And we've continued to do that work, that exhibition curatorial work, because it gives you a space that you'll never have in commercial practice.
I love hearing all the stories about effectively how universal design is, and to be a designer. Like how natural it is for you to gravitate between different mediums or different disciplines, some would say, but really it's all the same thing, especially if you consider that architecture or design is the mother of all art, right? And that Bauhaus thought. It's very natural for you to gravitate in between both of these things.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, right? Because like you can move across these disciplinary boundaries, and then also just thinking like, where do they need to also still be held? Like, whilst you're navigating and moving across, you're also still acknowledging that, there is still these kind of pockets of disciplines. But I guess ultimately, it is just all kind of like creative spatial outputs. And I think there's something really nice about someone coming from a different discipline, and like that just gives a kind of fresh perspective. And maybe you're not limited by the things that you think you can and cannot do. Yeah,
it's all about relationships.
Yeah, ultimately, that's kind of, I think anyone who's worked in design knows how critical relationships are for you to get anything off the ground. And that's why, this whole idea of like self-made or solo work or solo practice just doesn't exist. Like, I think we all exist, like our lives are very collaborative. It's all relational, right? Like,
absolutely.
The only reason I think of something a certain way is because of all the people that I've been in contact with and how that's shaped me. So
everything's in a lineage.
There's never anything that is independent in that way. It's all relational constantly. Yeah.
You're definitely thinking about these ideas a lot at the moment because you're in your PhD at RMIT, and that's a critical reflective process on design.
Yeah. Yes.
Who have been some of your mentors or peers, if you will, that in particularly in Melbourne or in Australia you're connecting with as part of your practice?
In Australia, I would say, so that exhibition we did with Collie, it just to give a background in terms of what it was. So it was called Say It Loud, and it emerged in New York through this non-for-profit organization called Beyond the Built Environment. And the whole premise of it is to highlight and create visibility for work by women and BIPOC designers, so BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and having their work kind of elevated and trying to see what their contributions are in terms of like knowledge production. And that was a really great opportunity for us who have practiced in Melbourne to discover other people who are doing incredible work but might not be spotlighted in the way that certain practices might be spotlighted. So for me, there's quite a few people who are in the, I guess, academic space. So I would say, for example, at Monash, the Womanjika Jabana Lab, the Indigenous Design Lab, Desiree, I love her. Like, we kind of showcased her work. She's doing incredible work. That entire lab is doing really interesting work in thinking about indigeneity in a First Nations perspective here in Australia, but then also thinking about other Indigenous communities that exist in the, I guess you could call it global majority, so global South and South America, just kind of bringing those ways of thinking. So I really love the work that they're doing in their lab. Then there's also practice like Public Realm here in Melbourne. I really like their work.
Anna Mesquia who spoke on the program right after the cleanup at the awards.
Yeah, incredible. Love their work. And then there's also just like independent, like kind of like practitioners. Like, for example, I absolutely love Sonia Sarangi, for her practice, but also her advocacy and how she like really embeds herself in the community and like helps uplift. So there's a lot of work that's not necessarily seen that designers do that might not necessarily be, you know, your beautiful design outputs, but then also the work that you're doing to continue to uplift other designers amongst you and trying to kind of correct the things that you have had to go through and be like, well, you know, I didn't have that. I'm going to be that for everyone else who's coming up. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, collectively working to try and make the profession a better place.
Yes. Ultimately, that's what we're trying to do, right? Yeah.
You have to. I think it's really great for the public to hear these stories and hear how hard designers are working to improve our industry.
Yeah, and that keeps me very hopeful because there's just so many people out there doing incredible things. And like a platform like this, Ilana, is like spotlighting that. And I think sometimes you can just be in your little cocoon and just not know that there's so much out there. And I actually really think stepping out of like commercial practice was so important for me because I discovered so many different organizations and communities that are doing amazing work. And I just probably would never have had access to that had I just kind of stayed in that climb the ladder kind of mindset of not looking, you know, to the side and see who are your peers and what are they working on.
What was the aha moment for you?
I think the one thing that I constantly hold on to is trying to move away from anything that is singular. So that is just a life philosophy and how that works into my work as well. So there's no singular narrative. There's no singular like kind of neutral thing. Everything is situated. And I think for me, that's really critical in anything when you interact with a person, understanding the context and the situatedness of them and you and your positionality. I think it's really important to just know that everything always has different cadences and it's not there's no neutral, there's no singular, it's many, and it's fine to hold many. I think there's also this thing of trying to contend with, well, this against that, but no.
Oversimplification.
Yes, exactly. Or trying to hold like these binaries. It's like, no, we can have multiple things and they can exist at the same time.
Yeah.
And that's fine.
And life can be messy and hard and complicated and we can hold those multiple truths.
Exactly. That's PhD in a nutshell. Like it's literally that. Can you hold that complexity and just kind of like, reflect on that? I think it's very important for us to be able to do that.
But ultimately it makes design so much better, doesn't it?
Oh, it's so enriching. It's so enriching. And I think that's kind of what broadening design practice is. And I think for me, when I think about even like a kind of decolonial way of practice is really about expanding. It's additive.
Yeah.
It's not about countering. It's just how can we make room for more voices, more perspectives, and learn from each other because that's what happens when you do that.
Yeah. Form more connections and find pluralism. I'm really interested in that in architecture and design. How do we get pluralism in the built environment where people can see and find and read their own stories or their own understandings and perspectives in multitudes?
Yeah.
How can a building or a space mean multiple things to different people?
And it will ultimately, because like we don't all experience the thing the same way. And I think that's why like, you know, things like this where you're trying to kind of distill things in the most, I guess, it's not really about simplicity. It's just about access.
Yes.
Because that's what design is for. It's for people.
Yes.
And if someone can't access what you're doing or has no say in what you're producing, then it's just an isolated solo kind of act, and I think that's I have a big problem with that in terms of architecture and how sometimes it can be very star architect focused, and it's like what I want to put in. But
It's definitely a choice to look out as a practitioner, as a creative person, to look out at the world, to offer something to the world, to have that curiosity.
yeah, I love that. Yeah.
I love that in your practice.
Oh.
Let's pivot to interior design proper. Let's talk about Little Lagos. Very well published hospitality interior project. Tell me about that one.
So I would say that was my first project that I did. Trying to think about like my practice. So I was still working full time. There's a lot of work I've done while I'm still working full time. A busy one. But that came through Instagram, believe it or not. I'm a big advocate for like social media being a platform for you to get work, because it's also like how you position yourself. So I remember having a hiatus of social media and saying I'm gonna come back if I can make it worthwhile with my time. And then I set up my own practice one, separate to my personal stuff. I did not follow my friends on it. I was like, sorry, like this is sacred space. It's just going to be about design. And then that allowed me to kind of get access to, Little Lagos. So Little Lagos, I worked with Ade. Shout out to Ade. Little Lagos was in Sydney. So I was doing a interstate project as my first project.
Awesome.
Which is wild. But I think we connected with Ade from the get, because I understood his vision. He's of Nigerian background. He loves food. And he's like very connected to like how he cooks. He loves it. And he's like, I want to share this. And I want to share Lagos, like what he remembers Lagos to be, the marketplace, like the colors, the scents and all of that. But then also do it in a contemporary way. So that was the first kind of challenge. How do you kind of bring those things to Sydney? It was a new town, different context, but then still have something that people could resonate with on a very tight budget, slim budgets. And so there's a lot of trying to negotiate on how we do that. There was repurposing of certain elements, but I think the kind of key piece that held the space together was this fabric that we sourced from Nigeria, Adire fabric. So it's done by Yoruba women, and it's a dyed fabric. And it was very important for us to work with a fabric that was indigenous to that place, in the sense that it was a textile that they have been making for centuries, and it wasn't something similar to, say, the African wax print fabrics. Mm-hmm. That we have appropriated and kind of like made our own and adapted. But, their origins are from, I think it's like Dutch. Yeah, they're Dutch fabrics, right? Which were meant for the Indonesian market, but then found their way to Africa and resonated with us. But I think it was important to not do that and just be like, okay, what's actually like a traditional craft that we can bring in? And then kind of that draped the background of this seating, the banquet seating that we did, and just kept the palette very kind of neutral. And it's just been such a beautiful space, and the way he's activated it, and there's a lot of events always on and inviting different artists. So it's kind of taken a life of its own, which is really beautiful to see. But that was the first one that I did.
Amazing. What else was really strategic in that space in order to be able to facilitate the placemaking that your client is ultimately doing?
In terms of, I think for me, it was looking at, so we thought about different things. So there was the kind of spatial arrangement before we even came into the materiality, where there was flexibility for that space. So for example, it's a kind of long linear site, and the banquet seating was deliberately designed in that sense because you can clear out the entire space. So you can take out all the tables and all the chairs, and then all of a sudden it can transform into like a live event space, or like, like dancing can happen. And that happens a lot, like there's resident DJs that will take over. There's also spaces that we had allocated for like a gallery. So kind of rotating calendar of different artists. There's incredible photographers who are emerging in Sydney and Melbourne, and being able to have a space that allows them to have access to spaces that are not necessarily your white box gallery, but then can still be able to showcase their work. So it's adaptable, and it allows for people to come in and be allowed to tweak and make it their own in a sense. And I think that's kind of important. I think sometimes we can over-design or over-engineer spaces. And how do you allow for people to be able to have some sense of ownership if they kind of want to tweak it? So I think that was something that also Ade was really, really passionate about, being able to do that. And I think it's allowed for, that's become a really big part of Little Lagos, like the rotating calendar of events.
Really designing for that, give it a strategic backbone, give it that fabric, give it that banquet, anchor it, and let the users take over the rest and figure it out.
Yeah, we never want to do that. We're just like, it has to be, but I think that's also another thing of like,
it's a lesson.
Yeah, it's a lesson. Like, you'd have the most prestigious, like beautiful, like I've done this in practice where like the design's just perfect and you just don't want anything to go on there. Like, you don't want the owner to put an artwork. It's like, no, it has to be photographed in its, purest state. And I think sometimes it's a bit letting go of that, because people are ultimately going to occupy space and they're going to make it their own. They're going to put a cushion on that, and you probably bite your tongue because that'll be so. But I think that's allowing people to make spaces their own is also really important.
What were some lessons for you out of that first project?
Oh, yeah. All right. So one of the biggest lessons was call, don't text. I know it doesn't, because so, you're doing a project so far away, right? And they're just things that you're having to kind of manage on the go and trying to navigate. And I think it was so important to just like, for example, like, trades or like project manager, you'd send a text sometimes and it's like, oh, that wasn't received the way it needed to be received. I needed to just pick up the phone and call. And I also learned that sometimes like there's a kind of perception that designers are rigid and that we're not flexible. And it was recognizing that might be a positionality of the other person, and then trying to create comfort and trust and be like, we're together working towards the same goal. And I am so happy to be flexible around these things that matter. And then these are the things, and this is why they're important. I think communication just generally, and that's why the call was just like always important. If there was anything, it'd be like, let me call you and we can talk about it. And that alleviated so much stress. Like in the beginning, it was just like, why are we not, and then you realize, oh no, it's because, they might think I'm just pushing for the sake of pushing something. And then you have a conversation and, oh, it's resolved. So I think for me, yeah, just having very clear lines of communication and being able to pick up the phone and just chat to someone. Easy.
Was that quite a quick project as well? Hospitality can have some really fast timelines.
Yeah, it was very fast. It was, yeah. And interestingly, it was also during the COVID period. So there was a bit of lockdowns happening at the time.
All right, so you were stuck in Melbourne. You weren't coming out for site visits.
Yeah, I couldn't. I literally couldn't. The first time I actually got onto site was when it was done. So there's a lot of like video calls and being like, no, there's a lot of having to like rely on
good communication, good collaboration.
And that's why, the comms was so important. And then, getting there. And then I almost got stuck in Sydney as well. Like I was flying out the night before there was another lockdown. So it was a really challenging one, to be honest, to get done. But I think if you just have good comms and just a good team, like there's so much that you can achieve. So now we're working on an exhibition with Collie in Toronto, and neither one of us are there, but I think we've kind of learned along the way how to get things done.
Another awesome long distance project. That's the Black Diaspora project.
Yes.
Tell me about that one.
So Black Diasporas is it's a project that Collie ideated. He always says, no, we do this together. And I'm like, yeah, but take your flowers, you dreamt this up. But it's an archive. It's a digital archive of stories. It focuses on people of Afro heritage and looks at places of meaning to them. And it's kind of geolocated. So you can go online on blackdiasporas.com and there's a pin for every story. And so he started it in New York, did a pilot, came to Melbourne, managed to get some funding from the Scanlon Foundation, and then did the Melbourne iteration where we worked with 85 creatives and gathered over 500 stories.
Huge.
Which is really incredible. And then we worked with 10 filmmakers who produced short films for those stories.
Wow.
And that framework has kind of been really solidified, and moving that to Toronto now and doing kind of similar framework. And we generally use census data to establish where people from. And then we work with specific people from those communities to do the interviewing process, because it's much more of a conversation than an interview. There's different nuances that someone would understand from, say, if you're Kenyan. If I'm speaking to a Kenyan, there might be things that I'll pick up on and ways that I can direct a conversation that maybe someone who's, say, colleagues from Zimbabwe, he might not understand. We're both African, but we have such different nuances around that. So
Also a gigantic continent.
yeah, and for us, it's so important to do that as well and recognize that even in the project and go, no, you have to interview someone from, because you'll be able to have that dialogue. So that's critical in getting up the stories. And then there's always an exhibition output, because it's really important for people to be able to be physically located and then be able to listen to those stories, and giving space for them to do that. But it lives on as an archive online, but I think it's still important to materialize it in
That's
some
true.
way.
That's so true. Exhibition has such a physical moment in time, such a physical presence that people arrive at, look forward to, they come, they see.
They linger, they sit, they listen. And
Holds the attention span, unlike the internet, much better, doesn't it?
oh my goodness, yeah, definitely. We did the Melbourne one and we had it for a week, and it was so interesting to see people come back like a couple of days. So people would just drop by during their lunch break and like sit in and listen to stories, and then they come back again and they come back again. And I think that was really nice to see that it was something that people were willing to return to, because there's just so many stories, and you can just sit there and listen for ages. And the stories can also resonate with communities that are not necessarily of African background. Like one of my really good friends, she's Finnish, and she was listening to one of the heritage stories of, how did you find your way to Australia? And she's like, that's my story, and there's something really beautiful about that something can be so specific, but then yet so universal in a kind of shared experience.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And another thing that I should state, Collie would kill me for not saying this, the idea of the stories is that they move beyond the kind of heroic or the tragic, and realize life is always like in the mundane in between. Why do I like catching this particular bus or this tram? Like those are the stories that we are really interested in.
The everyday moments.
The everyday moments, yeah.
Oh, why is that particularly powerful for you?
I think because if you think about the representation of Black people, oftentimes it's either the great athlete or hyper excellence, or it's this kind of like tragic African gangs narrative, and it's kind of like, yeah, those things exist, but then like majority of us really, like, even when we have those points in our lives, like our lives are really about this kind of everydayness and the kind of in between space, and it's about like having more of those stories. It's that idea of like more stories give a more rounded
Yes.
understanding of a person.
Yeah.
And one story or one particular person cannot speak for an entire community as well.
And also, we're all people that do the same boring things sometimes.
100%. Yeah.
Like taking the bus.
That's it.
What else is next for you on the horizon?
I think, well, in terms of most immediate, it would be the Black Diasporas Project. So I'll be traveling soon for that one in the next 2 weeks. And then my confirmation for my PhD, which is in October. So I'm setting my sights quite short at the moment to get these things done. But I think ultimately it will just be to have more rigor in my practice, which is why I'm doing the PhD to begin with. And just really kind of like formulate what it is, and continue to seek out projects that are, I guess, fulfilling, feed the soul, put out some beauty in the world. That's.
I know it's early in your PhD still, but what have you discovered about your own practice already?
That it's messy. And I shouldn't try and smooth it out.
Oh, that's a good tip.
Yeah. that's kind of where the magic is in that bit of chaos. And because initially I thought I'll start the PhD and eventually I'll I'll find my focus and then I'll deep dive. But then I've realized that it's not. It's like this horizontal plane, and that's fine. And that's the way I'm interested in working. And I think it also kind of comes from this recognition that there's an intersectionality in my kind of existence, like just being kind of, first of all, just transnational, Kenyan, living in Australia, speak 3 languages. Like there's just so many multiplicities in the way that I exist and view the world and things. And that's why I'm interested in so much of an interdisciplinary way of working, and just being okay to hold that and just work within that plane. I think that's been probably the largest learning early on. Like I can only speak for the few months, but my idea of being streamlined is out the window, and I'm very happy to hold this complexity.
Fantastic. I want to ask about the 30 under 30, the 80 under. Did you go to that mysterious trip to Bali?
I did.
What can you tell us?
Look, I cannot disclose much, but no, it was great. It was an incredible bonding experience. I have to say that I wasn't there for the full experience because of Melbourne Design Week. But yeah, it was incredible. It was great. I highly recommend.
So it's a recognition program, isn't it?
Yes. So I think it was the inaugural one, and it was a recognition for, I guess, emerging designers. Across different fields. So there was, architects, interior designers, industrial designers, and since then it's kind of continued and gained momentum. I was looking at the winners for this year, all really incredible designers as well. So I think it's a really great platform to meet other people, kind of exploring similar ideas or different. And I think like we're still kept in touch, and we still continue to, seek out each other's counsel for things. I still reach out to some of my friends and ask them, what do you think about this? And what are you guys working on? So I think it's really helped expand the community of practice for me.
It's great to hear about programs and events that bring people together rather than putting them as competition.
Yeah. Oh, it's you just move out. Like when you work together, you go further. So I think it's just important to instill that. And the amount of things I have learned from the people around me and my peers, like I said, like it's this relational thing, just always acknowledging that that's how you grow. And I don't think there's anything that anyone loses from collaborative work and bringing more people in. I think there's only more to gain.
Here. I want to ask my last question. So what gives you hope?
I'd honestly say my students, because I feel like they're the next generation of designers that are coming onto the forefront, and to see the way that they're willing to engage and be critical with topics that I, at the time, wasn't even thinking about, is really inspiring. I think they really understand where we are at the moment. They really understand the power dynamics that are at play. They're thinking about the historical and the social implications, and they want to do something about it. And I think we just need more of that will to want to do better.
Here comes the next generation.
Yeah. Oh, watch out.
Watch out, world. Watch out, world. They're coming. Thank you so much for joining me on the program, Sandra.
Oh, thank you so much, Ilana.
Thanks for joining me for another evening of Radio Architecture with Ilana Razbash. This live show was broadcast and recorded in the Radio Karim studio on Bunurong Country. You can replay the show wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for tuning in and supporting community radio. Take care.
Oh, g'day, it's Ash Davies, and when I'm driving around the Mornington Peninsula,